19th of May 2018, which was, for some people will remember if they're royalists, was the royal wedding. And it was also my youngest daughter's Holy Communion. I woke up that morning with an itchy knee. My right knee was itchy. Said to my wife, it felt a bit funny, but didn't really give it a lot of thought. Thought perhaps I'd been bitten by an insect during the night. And we got ready and we went off to our local church for our daughter's confirmation. So when we got there, it started to, we'd walked because we didn't live that far from the church, and it started to be a little bit more irritable. It was starting to, I could feel it starting to swell up a little bit. And then when I sat down in the church, I actually was a bit uncomfortable when I was sat down because, you know, the pews are quite small, aren't they? Well, they are for me, because I'm over 6 foot. So we came out and we went literally across the road from the church to a pub to have a celebration, because we were with some friends and they came with us for a lunch. And while we were there, the weather was really nice that day. I remember it being very, very sunny, and you know, obviously there was a lot of celebration going on because of the wedding. And I just didn't feel right in the pub. I felt quite rough. I felt like I had a bit of a temperature, and I just felt very tired. So my father was there, and he offered to take me home. So I said to my wife, look, I'm going to just head home. I'm going to have a doze, because we had friends coming back to our house. And then later that evening, one of our friends came up, and I was lying in bed, and he just came up to see how I was, and he said, "Oh God, your knee's really inflamed and it's really hot." And it was quite swollen. I said, "Oh," I said, "I've obviously had a really, again, just felt I'd had this bad reaction to what was a bite or something like that." On the Sunday morning, about 5 o'clock, I woke up and got up to go to the toilet and felt very woozy. It didn't feel with it. Went to the toilet, got back into bed, said to my wife, "I just don't feel great." And I think she realised at that point that I wasn't well, because I'm generally, well, we both are, in fairness, quite stoic. So, and I think that's a little bit from my parents. I guess their era was, you know, get on with it, basically, put up, shut up, you know, take a tablet, you know, move on. So we rang 111. This was probably about 6:30 in the morning at this point, and discussed some of the symptoms. And then I got a call back from a doctor quite quickly, actually, if I remember it rightly. Within literally 15 minutes, there was an ambulance outside our house Sunday morning, and I got taken to Whipps Cross and had some blood tests and etc. And I was beginning to feel a bit rougher. So I stayed in the overnight in that A&E part that's kind of where you're assessed. And then Monday evening, the consultant said, "Look, we're going to do a surgery on you. We think you might have necrotising fasciitis, which is the skin rotting disease," which I guess the risk then was at that point that they might have to chop off part of my leg, which would have been great. So anyway, I was put into a bed. I was told I might end up in intensive care. And then my wife went off home, and I went off into surgery, and then woke up in high dependency, fortunately not in intensive care, clearly by the fact that I woke up, although I was very out of it, sometime on the Monday. And they basically cut a chunk of, like, they'd opened my leg up about 6-7 inches, the base of my leg on my shin. And then that began a pretty horrible couple of days, you know, wired up to various machines. I had very serious AFib. My heart rate went up to like 150 beats a minute. They couldn't cool me down. My temperature went highly elevated. So I was on the Monday night into the Tuesday, I ended up very delirious. I was being covered in wet towels to basically try and cool me down. Subsequently, I had a follow-up with the hospital a month or so later, and did say that I owed him my life, because he must have known the circumstances of what was going on. And I was just lying there, you know, and he said to the team, he said, "Look, I don't think we should do the surgery." Now, what that surgery was, which I only found out after, was they were going to actually amputate my leg. And he basically said, "Look, I'm going to do this series of tests. And if we all agree that if this is the whatever that, I sort of, this is vague memories for me. So I don't, this is not, I'm sure this wasn't the full conversation of the lines of, if we get the result I think we should get, then I think we should not conduct the surgery. So what he did is proceeded to stab me in the leg with various pins in the top of my leg. And I believe that because each time he did it, I bled, they decided that they were going to hold off on the surgery. And so I was taken back to the ward. And that was probably my low point. I think at that point, I did start to turn a corner. Partly, I suspect, because we got 3 children and the whole everything, just trying to, Christ, I've just got to survive. You know, I've got to get through this. So I think it was on the Wednesday or the Thursday, and he took the bandage off. And literally, there was this open, gaping wound, which was pretty horrendous. This like flap of open flesh. So it was an open wound. So when I went into the surgical ward, that was because obviously at some point they were going to actually stitch it up. And so later in the second week, I went back for that surgery, and they closed up the wound. And I was actually allowed to leave the hospital that Saturday. So I'd been in hospital just under 2 weeks. They never knew what did it. So even though my knee swelled up, they actually did, because they thought it was the knee and they were going to treat it. They did this procedure where they put a needle right under the kneecap. They draw out the fluid, which is a pleasant experience. And they were fully expecting that fluid to come out bloody and dark and infected. And in fact, it came out completely clear. And so at that point, they admitted they didn't actually know. They couldn't actually say with any certainty how or where my sepsis came from, other than it started on my knee. So that's always been a little bit like, I wonder how the hell did it start? So yeah, the only thing we put it down to is that year I had a colonoscopy. Even though I didn't have any actual bleeding or anything like that, it did actually damage my colon, even in a micro way. And that allowed something that I ingested or something that was in my stomach to get into my bloodstream and cause the sepsis. I think I obviously have to thank my wife, because I think I would have toughed it out on that Sunday, and that would have probably ended up killing me. If I'd have been in my own, I know I would have done. It's just that would have been my mentality. Oh, it's a swollen knee. I'll take some paracetamol. Stop being a moan. I'll be going to New York next week. That would have been my mentality. It was my wife that was like, no, you're not like this. We need to check with 111. At the time, I was trying to get promotion, and I put that in front of myself and my wife. Actually, I think. But it was important to me because obviously as well, I have children and we have commitments there. And so as a consequence, we wanted to, I wanted to sort of make sure that I was doing the best I could. But then subsequently, I think the following year, I don't think mentally I'd really recovered. And I struggled the following year. I did get promoted, but I actually struggled. And I had a very what I found very unreasonable manager at the time who just didn't care, didn't want to care. And I didn't have the wherewithal to fight it. And I look back and think, well, I was stupid. Should have stayed out longer, or perhaps should have just said, look, you've got to be a bit more flexible here for me, because actually I've been through a pretty traumatic experience physically and mentally. And I've got a wife that I need to take care of as well, But this is the things we do, right? When we try and, keep our lives on an even keel, and, and also the fact that if you've survived death, I guess you take the view, well, I did, that Christ, I've got to get on and live. I can't sit back and wait and let things stop. I just, because I could have lost everything. But that was a consequence of it, because I think my wife, she knew that there was this risk I was going to have my leg amputated. And she just didn't know how I would cope, and how we would cope, And I think that's the stress of that triggered her health problem. Well, in my case, listen to your wife. And two, just don't be too dismissive. If something, I think just don't be dismissive. If something isn't, if it doesn't feel right, like if a swollen knee is getting redder and redder and hotter, and you're starting to feel a little bit not quite with it, then that's probably not just a fever. That's probably something a little bit more serious. And there is nothing wrong with ringing 111. That's when 111, for me, not 999 to begin with. I think 99, unless you're literally keeling over, that's a different thing entirely. But in my case, my wife ringing 111 led to the right path, because it meant that, I mean, they're phenomenal. How you diagnose something like that over the phone, I don't know, but they did, and it was brilliant. Prioritize yourself and your family. Work will be there, and there are things that can protect you that stop work not being there. And work is not the most important thing in life. It's just not, and that's something that took me a long time to realise. And what is important is, you know, and I know it's not a cliche, it's a truth. It's your family, it's your wife or your partner and your children, and they are the ones that will always be there for you.